What's going on, y'all? It's Greg with Greg Said It. Man, I had to get with you all. We had a live last night. B. Watts. We had a good conversation. Honestly, had some technical stuff with YouTube on the monetization side, but overall, it was a great show. We took off last week. Very entertaining, and I would say informative. Got active in the chats, good participation. And it reminded me of some things, and I wanted to kind of elaborate on some things. Because when y'all think about Greg Said It is the person who's going to say the things that other content creators want to say, but they want to be politically correct at times, or be safe. I also may say some things that the coaches and players want to say, but they got to be politically correct to say. So that's what I'm here for. But I'm also that guy that can break things down in a more analytical way. Not analytical with a bunch of big words and football jargon that talk over people's head and make people feel like I know more than them, but in a way that even a baby can understand it. And when I say things that's kind of bold, I have to be able to back it up. So I have something called, and a lot of people hate this, but hey, because they say Colorado could have lost more games. I always said Colorado could have won more games, and people say they could have lost more. But the reality is, I have this theory. I call the Colorado barely lost theory. And it's not just a theory. I even decided to take a few notes, because a lot of times I don't want to really get into the notes in the stats component, but I have some for sake of this video. Colorado, by the time they got to Oregon, it was downhill. Travis got hurt a few games. He came back for Stanford, right? And that was after a break. And then they went right into UCLA. This is where everything really went downhill. From Stanford, but UCLA, it definitely went downhill. And this is what happened. We saw that they lost to USC 48-41, right? The great comeback they could have had. The ref was helping there too. Kamani got a pick. They say he was out of bounds. He clearly went out of bounds. He stood on the sideline before he went out. He didn't barely go out. They say he didn't have possession of the ball, whatever, stepped out of bounds. But they was really running USC down. That probably could have changed the course of the season, because you instead of taking air out of those guys, they probably wouldn't have lost Stanford, and they probably had a different turnout towards the rest of that season, because they had just lost to Oregon. And they barely beat Arizona State. And so this was the game. You come back after you break and all that. Travis was back. They blowing them away, and then it just went really negative for them. And that's when they beat Stanford 46-43 when they came back against Stanford. And in reality, Stanford came back against them. And that was just downhill from like I said, USC could have changed the course of the season as far as the mindset and the momentum. Stanford really just made them feel confused and bewildered. Like, what is going on? We gave up that lead. It was probably a lot of pointing and negativity, and it really stirred up everything, because by the time you got to UCLA, you started to see some of the changes, right around that time with the coaching staff and the offensive coordinator and stuff like that. And when I look at the UCLA, this is what I say about barely lost. 6-0 in the first quarter. Colorado's winning. Now, this is the argument I had about Nebraska being such a great defense. They're so great. And UCLA was known to have a pretty stellar defense, especially at that point. They had a couple first-rounders on the D-line. There was the linemen that Colorado was twerking, letting the guys through. But, they had top guys. They were hitting the mess out of Shador. Sacked them all over the place. They couldn't move the ball. And Colorado kicked 2 field goals, from what I remember. It was 2 field goals. That's how they got 6. And they wasn't scoring. The defense was popping. They was turning them over. We know that. They had to get Charlotte up out that game, but everybody was popping. That's when the defense really started to turn around. That's when you really started to see that it was different, right? They went up, offense went down. And we would see it in the production. 6-0. They could not get the ball in the end zone. They got field goals. They had a chance to go into the halftime up 6-0 after piss poor offensive play. And that's when they made that crazy clock management, game management decision where they was pent back against the goal line, and they kept throwing the ball. Instead of just run the clock out and punt it or whatever, or getting the first down, they punted it, let a guy get a good return, and UCLA scored right before the halftime. So that's when you got that 7-6 going into halftime. Colorado literally could have went 6-0 with a bad game into halftime. They ain't scored yet. They just kicked field goals. They scored 1 touchdown, and they had the lead. They came out, and Colorado got another field goal for the, you fill in the blanks of the ones who question what I was saying about Nebraska. Nebraska's defense was like that. They kept saying Colorado was getting good field position. Why didn't they have to kick field goals? Note that. Because they kicked 3 field goals against UCLA, who had a really good defense. And they really could have been 21 at that point, but they only was getting field goals. So Colorado was 9-7. And then by the end of that half, it was 9. At the end of that third quarter, it was only 9-14. That was around the time they put Charlo out the game. UCLA wasn't even up by a 4 touchdown at that point. But what happened was, disrupted their team. Colorado finally scored in the fourth quarter and got 7. So it was 16. And then UCLA scored 2 touchdowns, which led them to getting 28-16. They beat Colorado by 12, but they only scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They scored 7, 7, and 14. Colorado scored 6, 0, 3, 7. So they didn't score in the second quarter at all. And they only had field goals up to the fourth quarter. So if any one of them had been touchdowns, the games would have been different. But this is at the point where we showed our famous video where we watched with the line twerking, letting the men run full speed into Shador, letting them hit them. They call it what it is. They look right at them and didn't even try to block them on both sides of the ball. This was the game was looking really suspect. This was around the time they changed OC and all that, and it was like a protest, I guess. Let's look back at it. See, Greg gonna break it down. So you're looking at the reality that they basically threw that game. The line and block worth of crap. Colorado only scored 16 points. Now look at that average up to that point. They scored 43 at Stanford. They scored 27 at Arizona State. And they scored 41 at USC, and so on and so on. They were scoring in the high 30s and 40s all the way up to that point outside of ASU. So their average was over 30 points. But this game, they only scored 16. This is the game that I feel like Shador actually was hurt officially. I think he was dealing with some stuff, but I think this is the game he got hurt. This is my opinion. You can ask him. He's already was hobbling and hurting and stuff, and we didn't know it was the ankle, the knee, but he was getting hit in that back, and I think this is where he was getting fractured when they was letting him get hit full speed from behind. Them left guards and tackles just letting him through. And so we go into the next week, OSU. Oregon State, they were at home. They really were in control of this game. If anybody actually watched the game, you don't need the stats, but I'm going to give them to you. Colorado. I'm going to put it like this, looking at it. Colorado was in control of the game kind of later, but they were, right? So it was 7-0 first quarter. That's Oregon State. Second quarter, Oregon State was up 14. Colorado only kicked the field goal. So we seen the same kind of pattern, right? 14-3 going to halftime. Then Oregon got 6. Colorado got a safety. So it was what? 20-5. So it was looking crazy. So technically he said they weren't in control of nothing. But then in the fourth quarter, Oregon only got 6 and Colorado got 14. It was a little too late, basically. And they only lost the game by, by a touchdown? They lost by a touchdown. So they couldn't really stop Oregon State from scoring. It was 26-19 final score. Colorado offense really did nothing until the fourth quarter. Defense played solid. Think about it. That same defense held Oregon State, whether you say bad field position like we talked about with Nebraska, they held Oregon State, who was pretty solid, to 26 points. It was no like all the other games where they was giving up 30, 40. So the defense was producing more. The offense, again, didn't even bust 20. They did 16 at UCLA, and then they turned around and they did 19 at home against Oregon State. They didn't even break 20. But then we go into Arizona. I think we're back at home again, right? So Arizona, 7 points in the first quarter. Colorado, 14. So they truly were in control. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I was thinking about. Arizona only had 7. Colorado had 14. So Colorado was managing that game. They both got 10 in the second quarter. Colorado leading at halftime. They both got 7 in the third quarter. Then Colorado got 0 in the fourth quarter. And Arizona got 10. And they ended up beating Colorado by a field goal, which basically means they got a touchdown and a field goal. They sealed the game with a field goal. Okay? It's some other things that I've always talked about in these games, that some suspect calls. When you look at these scores, Colorado was kind of managing that game. This Arizona game got pulled away at the end. They ended up beating Colorado only by a field goal because the game clearly was tied 31-31, and then they got the field goal, and it was 34-31. That was the score, right? But this game, Colorado scored over 30. This is also the last full game Shedeur played, because after that they went to Washington State, got beat bad, and Shedeur didn't even make it. He didn't even make half a game. And we know he didn't play in Utah. So this was Shedeur's last-ditch effort. He was getting shot up and everything, and he still put up 31 points. With a line for the last few weeks at that point, let him get sacked all over the place. He was already hurt. But yet he put up 31 points. For some reason, the defense, I don't know, they didn't play that great. That game, they get up 34. If they had played like the weeks before, they would have won. They had to gave up only 26, 28. If they had to gave up one less touchdown, they would have won that game. But if you remember, it was some crazy calls. It was some calls that gave some extra chances. You know, if you really look at it, Stanford had some extra chances. All these games that were close, it was some key calls, some personal fouls, some roughing the passer, you know, or not calling roughing the pass. We got Shedeur getting roughed up in the UCLA game. You got Shedeur getting roughed up, and I even believe in the Washington State, I remember just some rough in the passer, but it wasn't necessarily going our way. And of course, we already know what happened to Utah. Colorado was 0 in the first quarter. We had a new quarterback in. They got 7. Second quarter, Colorado got 10. UCLA had 6. They got a 0 again in the third. And Utah got 7. And then Colorado got another touchdown. They got 7. And then Utah got 3. Utah beat them by 6. Because in 2 quarters, Colorado didn't score. Now, that's really cute. But y'all forgot that Colorado had 3 touchdowns taken off the board. They had a punt return by Dylan Edwards that they call blocking back clipping or whatever. Clearly, the guy didn't do it. They called that back before they stopped the play. They stopped the play. Beep, beep, beep. He all the way down the field. Beep, beep, beep. That's a touchdown right there. They lost by 6, guys. Then they took 2 touchdowns from Travis Hunter. They say he stepped out of bounds. His foot was a mile away from sideline. A simple letting the play out and reviewing it would have saw it. Or they would have lied like they did when they say he bobbled the ball. The most cleanest diving catch we've seen all season. We've seen other ESPN catches diving that was less definitive than that, and it was called a catch. This man firmly had the ball. He didn't bobble it. He had control, and they took 2 touchdowns from a catch in the end zone and a run. They stopped the play on the run, and they called an incomplete catch, and they reviewed it and said he bobbled the ball on their decision. So in actuality, if we keep all things the same and take those back that they stole, Colorado would have beat Utah 38-23 instead of losing 17-23. Again, the defense did decent. They only allowed 23 points. It wasn't like 34 points, 40 points. So the defense did what they could do. When I say they did better than what they did in the beginning of the season when it was a shootout every game. For the most part, on the back end, outside of really Arizona and Washington State, really. Washington State out there, they were just, whatever. So when I give my theory, you can find your own numbers. I give you the number. Colorado barely lost, and when we say barely lost, people walk around, oh, they 4-8. They were a 4-8 team that lost by 6 to the great Utah. No matter how you want to define it or make excuses, they lost by 3 to Arizona. Is Arizona gonna beat them? Arizona beat them by 3. With an injured quarterback. Remember, he barely made it through that game. He didn't make it through any other game after that. Line one blocking. We saw that from UCLA down. Right? Oregon State beat them by 7. Again, every last one of these teams were ranked by the time they played them. Outside of Washington State. When they played UCLA, go back and look at the rankings. They were ranked in the top 25. Oregon State was ranked in the top 25. Arizona was ranked in the top 25. So these wasn't shabby teams playing against another shabby team. These were teams in their peak, and they barely beat Colorado with a hurt quarterback and a suspect line and team, really. So it's not about an excuse. It's about you try to downplay them for their record. You try to downplay them and use that to base it on this year's talent. This year's talent is way better. Their line is way better. Paper, however you want to put it, they're way better. So you really kind of proving the point when you compare last year to this year's team. So they're going to do the same thing because that team was struggling. That team was barely together, and these teams barely beat them, and they were ranked teams. They pretty much all of them had winning records. It wasn't Cal's and stuff like Stanford. These teams had winning records. They were bowl eligible, and they barely beat Colorado on their last leg. So if you really want to do that as a comparison, then look at how much better they are now. And look at the tools they have now. And look what they will have with a healthy quarterback now. Yet, they still rank Arizona above Colorado. Arizona barely beat, with help, a shabby Colorado. Colorado was at the worst. Arizona was at the best at that point. Arizona was on a roll, and they barely beat Colorado. Utah stole the game from Colorado. Oregon State barely beat them. And UCLA, if you really look at it, UCLA struggled. They pulled away at the end, and they had to kick the doggone starting safety out the game for using his elbow and saying it was targeting. It was help. It was phantom catches. We can go through all of that defined the game. I remember with UCLA, it was a catch that defined the game for them to pull away at the end. It's a theory, but it's also reality. Y'all got to realize, you want to play that game of comparing the old Colorado versus the new, you're going to realize really quickly that if that is the case, you really just showing what Colorado is going to be capable of doing this year. If they was capable of playing close enough games that they could have been 7-5 last year with a broken team. Because if you give them that Utah game, and if they complete that Arizona game, and if they complete that, it's even those 3 of those games, guess what? They're 7-5. But we know they also, UCLA was in trouble as well. They could have been 8-4. Like I've been saying the whole time, the theory of just throwing numbers out. The numbers are in front of you. Those games, yeah, they went one way, but they could easily went the other way. And they can say that about everybody. That's not true. These games were very definitive. There were only a few plays that defined it. And yeah, that's football. But it's also football that you're not acknowledging. That team wasn't a 4-18. There was a 4-18 on record, but they could have easily been a 7-5, 8-14. So if that team was able to be 7-5, you're not going to tell me that this team that's better, with better depth, better everything, better experience, that they can't win 9, 10, 11, 12 games. So you think about that. I'm just Greg. Greg said it. Make sure y'all like, share, subscribe. And I'll be talking to y'all soon.